Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will now come to order. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I welcome our invited guests and experts to a hearing on a subject that is very important to the constituents of my district. That subject is the access to broadband. For many Americans, broadband has become second nature, from sending emails, doing work, doing homework, watching our favorite shows, or ordering packages. People count on speedy and reliable broadband to connect with each other, foster new economic opportunities, and engage with the wider world. The need for broadband access was prominently revealed during the coronavirus pandemic, when even more activities moved online. Unfortunately, large sections of rural America, including much of my district, lack reliable access to broadband, putting many Americans at a disadvantage. The lack of broadband access in rural communities, or the digital divide, has been lessened. Billions of dollars spent by numerous federal agencies, and yet millions of Americans still lack access. When it comes to broadband access, a considerable number of people aren't underserved, they are still unserved. According to the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, at least 17% of rural Americans lack access to fixed broadband, defined as a minimum download speed of 25 megabits per second and 3 megabits per second upload speed. Only about 1% of Americans in urban areas can't access these speeds. That is a population of unserved people, and that is a separate issue from the question of affordability in those areas. If you are unserved, doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't practically gain access. The digital divide is certainly not a new problem. Federal government funding appropriated to help solve the problem hasn't been lacking. The federal government has been funding efforts to close the digital divide for decades and has spent billions of dollars. The problem has not improved as quickly or completely as was expected, and millions of Americans still lack access. Most recently, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 allocated nearly $48 billion to support broadband deployment in unserved and underserved areas, $42.45 billion through the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, also known as the BEAD program, $2 billion for the Tribal Connectivity Program, $1 billion for Middle Mile Grant Program, and $2 billion for the Reconnect Program. As I noted before the bill passed, no preference was given to unserved areas over underserved areas. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration, known as NTIA, housed inside the Department of Commerce, is charged with administering the majority of these funds. Prior to these programs, from 2015 to 2020, the federal government invested about $44 billion to increase Americans' access to broadband, and yet millions of Americans still lack access. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, a recent GAO report highlighted how federal efforts to expand access to broadband have been riddled with the classic problems we see with government-run programs. According to the GAO, federal broadband efforts are fragmented and overlapping. Within the many federal programs related to increasing broadband access, there's potential for overlap, duplication, and conflicting messages. Current federal efforts to increase broadband access involve more than 100 programs administered by 15 federal agencies. And yet, millions of Americans still lack access. Now think about that. 15 agencies, 100 programs riddled with lack of coordination. No wonder millions of Americans still lack access. And to make it worse, according to the GAO report from last May, the United States broadband efforts are not guided by a national strategy with clear roles, goals, objectives, and performance measures. Also troubling is that, according to the GAO, the administration has not decided if a national strategy is needed. I would submit that a national strategy is needed. It's necessary. And strong leadership to coordinate all of these agencies' spending on broadband access is needed. GAO has identified the Federal Communications Commission and the NTIA as having significant roles in expanding broadband access, and I look forward to this committee conducting additional oversight of those federal agencies and their spending on broadband. Today, however, I'm curious to hear from our witnesses. We appreciate you all being here. Curious to hear from them about the various challenges currently facing the federal government agencies tasked with expanding Americans' access to broadband, and I look forward to their testimony. And hopefully, soon, millions of Americans who don't yet have access will gain that access. I yield back. Now recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ranking